I found out my bees were dead on a Tuesday morning in late March, and the first thing I saw was Brenda Patterson standing at my fence line with her arms crossed, looking smug as hell. My name is Zachary Anderson, and I'd been keeping bees in my backyard in Boulder, Colorado for exactly 8 months. Not as a hobby, though. These weren't just any bees. They were part of a 3-year research study with the University of Colorado on colony collapse disorder and pesticide resistance. I had signed contracts, installed monitoring equipment, and was being paid a modest stipend to maintain the hive according to strict protocols. The university had invested over $40,000 in equipment and research time into this particular colony, and I had spent countless hours documenting their behavior, checking temperatures, and making sure everything was perfect. But that Tuesday morning, everything was gone. I had walked out to do my morning check, coffee in hand, when I noticed the complete silence. Normally, even from my back porch, I could hear the gentle hum of thousands of bees starting their day. But today, nothing. My stomach dropped as I approached the 2 white Langstroth hives positioned in the far corner of my yard, about 15 feet from the property line. The bees were everywhere, dead. Thousands of them carpeting the ground around the hives, piled up at the entrances, scattered across the grass. The monitoring equipment was still running, its small solar panel glinting in the morning sun, recording the death of a colony it was supposed to be studying. That is when I saw Brenda at the fence. She was maybe 55, with that specific haircut that somehow all HOA board presidents seemed to have, blonde with streaks that were meant to look natural but did not. She wore a pastel pink sweater set even though it was barely 50 degrees out, and her expression was one of pure satisfaction. "Good morning, Zachary," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I trust you received my notice about the pest control treatment?" My brain was still trying to process the devastation in front of me. "What notice? What are you talking about?" She pulled a piece of paper from the pocket of her khakis and waved it. "The one I had delivered yesterday afternoon. The HOA approved an emergency pest control treatment for the entire neighborhood. We had complaints about wasps, and we needed to act quickly for everyone's safety." "Those weren't wasps," I said, my voice coming out strangled. "Those were honeybees. They were part of a university research project." Brenda's smile faltered for just a second before returning even stronger. "Well, the HOA bylaws clearly state in Section 12, Paragraph 4, that residents must maintain their properties in a manner that does not create nuisances or hazards to neighbors. Several residents complained about bee activity, and as HOA president, I made the executive decision to handle the situation." "You killed my bees." I could not quite believe what I was hearing. "You had someone spray pesticides that killed my bees. I had a licensed pest control company treat the common areas and, with HOA authority, any properties that posed a threat to neighborhood safety," she corrected, her tone turning sharp. "If you had bees that were affected, perhaps you should have ensured they were not in violation of community standards." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. "I need to call the university. Do you have any idea what you have done?" Brenda sniffed. "I have done my job as HOA president, and I will remind you that any modifications to your property, including the installation of those unsightly boxes, should have been submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. I have been meaning to address that violation as well." She walked away, leaving me standing there with thousands of dead bees and a research project that had just gone up in smoke. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived within an hour of my call. She was the lead researcher on the project, a woman in her early 40s who had dedicated her career to understanding and preventing colony collapse disorder. She had personally selected my property for this study because of its location, the variety of flowering plants in the area, and my background in environmental science, which made me a reliable caretaker. Her face went pale when she saw the devastation. "Oh my God," she whispered, crouching down near one of the hives. She pulled out a pair of gloves and carefully picked up one of the dead bees, examining it closely. "Zachary, tell me exactly what happened." I explained everything Brenda had said. Dr. Martinez's expression grew darker with each sentence. "She had your property sprayed without your permission?" she asked, standing up and pulling out her own phone. "She claims the HOA has the authority to do it. Something about the bylaws and neighborhood safety." Dr. Martinez made a call. I could hear her speaking rapidly to someone, using terms like unauthorized destruction of research materials, and contractual violations, and potential legal action. When she hung up, she looked at me with a mixture of anger and determination. Zachary, this colony was not just valuable to the university, it was showing unprecedented resistance to certain neonicotinoid pesticides. We were documenting genetic markers that could have been crucial to understanding how to protect bee populations worldwide. This was potentially groundbreaking research. She gestured at the dead bees covering the ground. And someone just destroyed 8 months of work and a genetically unique colony that cannot be replaced. Can you tell what they used? I asked. She was already collecting samples, carefully placing dead bees into labeled containers. I will need to run tests, but based on the mortality rate and the fact that they are all dead, not just sick, I would guess a broad-spectrum insecticide, probably something with synthetic pyrethroids or organophosphates, exactly the kind of chemical that should never be used anywhere near a known bee colony. She paused, her jaw tightening. The monitoring equipment recorded everything. Temperature changes, activity levels, even audio. We will be able to pinpoint exactly when this happened. Over the next few hours, Dr. Martinez and 2 other researchers from the university documented everything. They took photographs, collected samples, and downloaded data from the monitoring equipment. A man named James Crawford, who introduced himself as the university's legal counsel, showed up around noon. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit that seemed out of place in my backyard. He listened carefully as I explained the situation again, taking notes on a tablet. "Did you sign any documents acknowledging HOA authority over your property improvements?" he asked. "I reviewed the bylaws before installing the hives," I said. "There was nothing that prohibited beekeeping. I specifically looked. The only requirements were that I maintain the property aesthetically and not create legitimate safety hazards. Honeybees are not listed as prohibited animals or hazards. Did you get the architectural approval the HOA president mentioned?" I shook my head. The bylaws state that architectural approval is required for permanent structures over a certain size and anything that modifies the exterior appearance of the home. These are movable hives in my backyard. They are not visible from the street or from any neighbor's property except where the yards back up to each other. I consulted with a real estate attorney before installing them, and he confirmed I was in compliance. James nodded, making notes. "And this notice she claims to have delivered yesterday?" "I never received it. I checked my mail, my doorstep. Everywhere. There was nothing. We will need to see if she has proof of delivery." He looked at the dead bees, then back at his tablet. "Dr. Martinez tells me the university has invested approximately $43,000 in this research site, including equipment, researcher time, and the value of the colony itself. That does not include the potential value of the research that has been lost. The university is prepared to pursue legal action to recover these damages." "What about me?" I asked. "I mean, I was being paid by the university, but these were still my bees on my property. Someone came onto my property without permission and poisoned them." James looked up at me. "You would have your own standing to sue, absolutely, for property damage, trespass, potentially even for intentional interference with contractual relations, since this damaged your agreement with the university." He paused. "Have you contacted the pest control company?" "Not yet. I do not even know which company it was." "Find out. We need to know exactly what was used and whether the HOA actually had the authority to order treatment on your private property." The next day, I started digging. I sent an email to Brenda Patterson requesting the name of the pest control company, copies of any notices that were allegedly delivered to me, and documentation of the HOA's authority to order treatment on my private property without my consent. I copied the entire HOA board on the email. Her response came within an hour, and it was exactly what I expected. "Mr. Anderson, as stated in our previous conversation, the HOA acted within its authority under the bylaws to address a safety concern. The pest control company was Summit Pest Solutions, a licensed and insured company that has worked with our HOA for years. Your continued questioning of legitimate HOA actions is becoming a pattern of hostile behavior toward the board, And I would remind you that the HOA has the authority to levy fines for creating disturbances within the community. Additionally, your bee boxes remain in violation of our architectural standards and must be removed within 30 days, or you will face daily fines of $50. I forwarded the email to James Crawford with a note. She is doubling down. His response was brief. Let her. I called Summit Pest Solutions next. A cheerful woman answered and connected me to their operations manager, a man named Rick, who sounded like he had been doing this job for 20 years and had heard every complaint imaginable. Yeah, I remember the Meadowbrook Hills job, he said when I explained who I was. The HOA president called us direct, said they had a wasp infestation and needed immediate treatment. We did a perimeter spray of the common areas, and she specifically requested we treat your property too. Did she provide authorization? I asked. Did she have a signed document from me allowing you to spray my property? There was a pause. She said she had HOA authority. We have worked with that HOA for 5 years, man. We trusted that she had the right to authorize it. What did you spray? Another pause, longer this time. Look, I do not want to get in the middle of something here. There were research honeybees on my property, I said, keeping my voice level. They are all dead. The university is pursuing legal action, and I am going to be doing the same. I need to know what chemical was used. I heard papers rustling. We used Tempo SC Ultra. It is a broad-spectrum insecticide, beta-cyfluthrin. It is labeled for wasps, hornets, lots of common pests. But yeah, it will kill honeybees too if they come into contact with it. That is why we always ask if there are beehives on a property before we treat. Did you ask about my property? The HOA president said there were no beehives, just wasps that needed to be eliminated. I felt my jaw clench. So she specifically told you there were no bees? That is what she said. Look, if she misrepresented the situation, that is between you and her. We followed our protocols based on the information we were given. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called James Crawford back. She lied to the pest control company, I told him. She specifically told them there were no beehives on my property. Can you get that in writing? James asked immediately. I can try. Do it. Email them, reference your conversation, ask them to confirm the details. We need documentation of everything. That afternoon, I sent a carefully worded email to Summit Pest Solutions, summarizing our phone conversation and asking Rick to confirm that the HOA president had told them there were no beehives on my property. To my surprise, Rick responded within 2 hours with a confirmation and even attached the work order, which included a note. HOA president confirms no honeybees on property. Clear for treatment. I forwarded it to James with a subject line. She committed fraud. His response came quickly. Now it gets interesting. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the bee massacre. I planned to attend. Dr. Martinez planned to attend. James Crawford planned to attend. And based on the flurry of emails I had started seeing on the HOA listserv, half the neighborhood planned to attend too. Apparently, I was not the only one who had problems with Brenda Patterson's leadership style. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige building that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. The room was set up with chairs in rows facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 2 board members on each side. I recognized most of them from neighborhood events, though I did not know them well. The room was packed, every chair was filled, and people lined the walls. Brenda looked surprised and a little nervous at the turnout, but she called the meeting to order with her usual officious tone. Welcome to the March board meeting of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, she began, reading from a prepared agenda. We will begin with the approval of last month's minutes, followed by the treasurer's report, then move to old business and new business. Public comment will be at the end. Point of order, James Crawford said from his seat in the front row. He had not introduced himself, but he had dressed for impact, full suit and tie, leather briefcase at his feet. Brenda blinked at him. I am sorry. Who are you? James Crawford, legal counsel for the University of Colorado. I am here regarding the unauthorized destruction of university research property that occurred on March 19th at the property of Zachary Anderson. He pulled out a document from his briefcase. I would like to add this matter to the agenda under new business. Brenda's face flushed. This is not the appropriate forum for personal disputes between residents and the HOA. This is not a personal dispute, James said calmly. This is a matter of potential legal liability for the HOA and its board members. I would think you would want to address it publicly rather than wait for formal litigation. One of the other board members, a man named Doug, who I had spoken to a few times at neighborhood barbecues, leaned forward. "What's he talking about, Brenda?" "It is nothing," Brenda said quickly. "Mr. Anderson had some bees that were affected by a necessary pest control treatment. He is overreacting." "Those bees were part of a $43,000 research project," Dr. Martinez said, standing up from her seat next to me. "And the HOA president ordered their destruction without authorization from the property owner, and after lying to the pest control company about their presence." The room erupted in whispers. Brenda banged a gavel on the table. "Order! We will discuss this in the appropriate section of the agenda." "I think we should discuss it now," said one of the other board members, a woman named Patricia, who ran the neighborhood book club. She was looking at Brenda with an expression of growing concern. "Did you really spend HOA money on pest control for a private property?" "It was an emergency safety measure," Brenda insisted. "The bylaws give the board authority to address immediate safety concerns." "Honeybees are not a safety concern," someone called out from the back of the room. "My kids do a whole unit on them in school. They are endangered." "They were Africanized bees," Brenda shot back, improvising badly. "They were aggressive and dangerous." "They were Italian honeybees, Doctor," Martinez said coldly. "Apis mellifera ligustica, selected specifically for their gentle temperament and suitability for research. I have all the documentation, and they were not aggressive. In 8 months, there has not been a single incident or complaint about them until you decided they were a problem." Doug was looking at papers in front of him now, flipping through what looked like the HOA's financial records. "Brenda, I'm seeing a charge here for $850 to Summit Pest Solutions on March 18th. That was not approved by the board." "I have discretionary authority up to $1,000 for emergency expenses," Brenda said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "For common area maintenance," Patricia said, pulling out her own copy of the bylaws, "not for treatment of private property." The meeting deteriorated from there. For the next 2 hours, the board argued while residents called out questions and complaints. It turned out that Brenda had made a lot of decisions without full board approval, and a lot of people had grievances they had been waiting to air. James Crawford let it play out for a while before standing up again. "I would like to make the board aware that the University of Colorado will be filing a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, the HOA board members in their individual capacities, and specifically against Brenda Patterson for negligence, trespass, destruction of property, and fraud. We are seeking full damages for the loss of the research colony, damage to ongoing research, and all associated costs." "You cannot sue us," Brenda said, her voice going shrill. "We have insurance for this kind of thing." "Your insurance policy likely does not cover intentional acts or fraud," James replied smoothly. "And based on the evidence we have, including the documentation that you specifically told the pest control company there were no beehives on the property when you knew that was false, this was at minimum reckless and potentially fraudulent misrepresentation." Patricia was pale now. "Brenda, what evidence is he talking about?" I stood up and held up my phone. "I have an email from Summit Pest Solutions confirming that Brenda told them there were no honeybees on my property. I also have the work order with that notation. She knew the bees were there because she mentioned them to me the morning after they died." The room erupted again. Doug banged the gavel this time. "Okay, everyone quiet down. Brenda, is this true?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed. "I did not think they were real honeybees. I thought they were some kind of wasps or something." "You told me they were bees that morning," I said, my anger finally breaking through. "You said the HOA took care of the bee activity. You knew exactly what they were." "This meeting is getting out of hand," Brenda said, standing up. "I'm adjourning it until we can discuss this matter in executive session." "You cannot adjourn in the middle of new business," Doug said. He looked at the other board members. "I move that we suspend Brenda Patterson from her duties as HOA president pending a full investigation into this matter." "Seconded," Patricia said immediately. "You cannot do that," Brenda shouted. "All in favor," Doug said. 4 hands went up. Only Brenda's stayed down. "Motion passes," Doug said. "Brenda, you are suspended effective immediately. Patricia, as vice president, you are assuming the role of acting president. This meeting is adjourned." Brenda grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room, her face bright red. The room buzzed with conversation as people started to leave, many of them coming up to me to express sympathy or ask questions about the bees. Dr. Martinez looked satisfied. "That went well. The lawsuit is still happening, right?" I asked James. "Absolutely," he said. "The HOA may try to settle now that they have suspended her, but we are going to make sure she is held personally accountable. And you should file your own claim too, police report for the trespass, and a civil suit for damages." That night I sat in my backyard looking at the empty hives. The bodies of the bees had been collected by the university for analysis, but I could still see the spots where they had fallen. The monitoring equipment was still there, now recording nothing but silence. I thought about calling my sister, but it was late on the East Coast. I thought about having a drink, but I was too tired. Instead, I just sat there in the dark, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. My phone buzzed. It was an email from James Crawford with a draft complaint for the lawsuit. I opened it and started reading. The University of Colorado was suing for $43,000 in direct damages, plus costs for researcher time, plus the value of lost research data, which they estimated at an additional $50,000 based on the potential impact of the findings and the inability to replicate the specific genetic colony. They were also seeking punitive damages. The legal language was dense, but the narrative was clear. Brenda Patterson had acted recklessly and fraudulently, causing massive damages to an important research project, and she needed to be held accountable. I forwarded it to my own attorney, a friend from college named Marcus Abrams, who practiced civil litigation in Denver. Within 20 minutes, he called me. "Zachary, this is wild," he said without preamble. "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I will be. James Crawford said I should file my own suit. What do you think?" "I think you absolutely should," Marcus said. "You have a separate claim for trespass, property damage, and potentially intentional interference with your contract with the university." "How much were they paying you?" $500 a month, plus a completion bonus of $5,000 if the study ran its full 3 years. So you lost at least $12,000 in future income, not counting the value of the bees themselves, and you have emotional distress, loss of use of your property, all kinds of other damages." He paused. "Plus, you should file a police report. What she did was criminal trespass at a minimum." "Will the police actually care?" I asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. But having the report on record helps establish the facts for the civil case, and if the prosecutor decides to pursue charges, that is just more pressure on her to settle." The next morning, I went to the Boulder Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my statement was a young woman who seemed genuinely interested in the case, especially when I explained about the university research. "So she poisoned your bees that were part of a scientific study?" she said, typing rapidly. "That is messed up." "Is it actually a crime?" I asked, "or is this just a civil matter?" She looked up from her computer. "Trespass is a crime. Criminal mischief, which is knowingly damaging someone else's property, is a crime. The value of the damages matters too. If it is over $2,000, it is a Class 2 misdemeanor. Over $5,000, it is a Class 4 felony." She pulled out a calculator. "You said the university values everything at over $90,000? That is their claim. My direct damages are probably more like $15,000 when you count the lost income. Still well over the felony threshold. I will get this to a detective, and they will decide whether to pursue charges." She handed me a card. "Here is the case number. You can follow up in a few days." I left the police station feeling slightly better. At least something was happening. Over the next few weeks, everything accelerated. The university filed their lawsuit. I filed my own suit with Marcus's help, naming both Brenda Patterson and the HOA as defendants. The new HOA board, now led by Patricia, hired their own attorney and tried to distance the organization from Brenda's actions, claiming she had acted outside her authority. Brenda hired a lawyer too, a man named Gordon Fletcher, who had a reputation for being aggressive. His first move was to send demand letters to me, the university, and the HOA, claiming that we were harassing his client and that the lawsuits were frivolous. James Crawford responded with a 20-page brief detailing exactly how frivolous our claims were not, complete with photographs of thousands of dead bees, documentation of the university's investment, testimony from the pest control company, and emails showing Brenda's knowledge and intent. Gordon Fletcher shut up after that. The detective assigned to my criminal complaint called me in mid-April. His name was Mike Rosenbaum, and he had been with the Boulder Police Department for 15 years. "Mr. Anderson, I have reviewed your case and interviewed witnesses," he said. "I want you to know that we are taking this seriously. The value of the damages and the apparent deception involved make this more than just a neighbor dispute." "What happens now?" I asked. "I am presenting the case to the district attorney's office with a recommendation to file charges for criminal mischief and criminal trespass. Given that Ms. Patterson knowingly made false statements to the pest control company to facilitate the trespass and destruction of property, there may be additional charges related to fraud or deceptive practices. Will she actually face charges? That is up to the DA, but I think the case is solid. The civil lawsuits help too because they establish the damages clearly. And the fact that this was a university research project adds weight." He paused. "Between you and me, I think people need to learn that HOAs do not have unlimited power. What she did was way over the line." 2 weeks later, Brenda Patterson was charged with 1 count of criminal mischief in the first degree, a Class 4 felony, and 1 count of criminal trespass, a Class 2 misdemeanor. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The HOA's attorney reached out to James Crawford almost immediately trying to negotiate a settlement. The HOA wanted to avoid a trial and the publicity that would come with it. They offered to pay $20,000 if the university would drop the suit. James called me before responding. "They are lowballing us hard. What do you think?" "How much do you think we can get if we go to trial?" I asked. "If we win, probably the full amount we are asking for, plus costs. The evidence is solid, but trials are expensive and time-consuming, and there is always risk." "What about Brenda personally?" "We are still pursuing claims against her individually. The HOA settling does not affect that." "Then tell them we want full damages or we go to trial." James laughed. "I like the way you think." The negotiations dragged on through May and into June. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Brenda moved forward. She pleaded not guilty at her arraignment and demanded a jury trial, which her attorney claimed would show that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overreaching prosecution. The problem for Brenda was that the evidence was damning. The work order showing she had lied to the pest control company, her own email to me acknowledging the bees, the university's documentation of the value of the research, my documentation of the income I had lost. All of it painted a clear picture of someone who had knowingly destroyed valuable property out of spite or negligence. In early July, Gordon Fletcher reached out to Marcus to discuss settling my personal lawsuit. He tried to be conciliatory, explaining that Brenda was just a concerned neighbor who had made a mistake and that she was willing to pay reasonable damages to resolve the matter. Marcus asked for $50,000. Gordon Fletcher countered with $5,000. Marcus laughed at him. "Your client destroyed a research project worth over $90,000, Marcus told him. "My client lost income, suffered emotional distress, and had his property rights violated. $50,000 is being generous." "The HOA is responsible for the bulk of those damages," Gordon argued. "My client was acting in her capacity as HOA president. Your client lied to the pest control company and exceeded her authority. The HOA has already moved to distance themselves from her actions. She is personally liable, and she knows it." The settlement talks stalled. Meanwhile, the university's case was also stuck. The HOA had increased their offer to $40,000, but James Crawford was holding firm at the full $93,000 they had claimed in damages. The HOA's insurance company was involved now, arguing about coverage and trying to minimize their exposure. "Insurance companies hate fraud claims," James explained when I met with him and Dr. Martinez at the university's legal office. "They are trying to argue that Brenda's actions were not covered under the HOA's liability policy because she acted outside the scope of her authority and made intentionally false statements. If they can exclude coverage, the HOA has to pay out of pocket, which they cannot afford. What does that mean for us? Dr. Martinez asked. It means the HOA might be willing to settle higher just to avoid their insurance company dropping them entirely. But we need to be patient. What about the criminal case? I asked. That is moving forward regardless. The DA's office is not interested in settling. They want to make an example out of this case to show that HOA board members are not above the law. The preliminary hearing for the criminal case was set for late July. I attended along with Dr. Martinez and James Crawford. The courtroom was small, just the judge, a prosecutor, Gordon Fletcher, Brenda, and a handful of observers. The prosecutor, a woman named Amanda Chen who looked like she had not slept in days, presented the evidence methodically. She called Rick from Summit Pest Solutions, who testified about the work order and Brenda's statement that there were no honeybees on my property. She introduced photographs of the dead bees. She showed the monitoring data from the university equipment, which included timestamps showing exactly when the bee activity ceased, corresponding with when the pesticides were applied. Gordon Fletcher tried to argue that there was no criminal intent, that Brenda had made an honest mistake, that she thought she was protecting the neighborhood. The judge was not buying it. "Counsel, your client told the pest control company there were no bees on the property," the judge said, looking over her glasses at Fletcher. She then acknowledged the bees to Mr. Anderson the next day. That is not a mistake. That is a knowing falsehood that led to the destruction of valuable property. I am binding this over for trial. Brenda looked like she was going to cry. Gordon Fletcher put a hand on her arm and whispered something to her. Outside the courtroom, Amanda Chen stopped me. "Mr. Anderson, I want you to know that we are committed to prosecuting this case fully. What Ms. Patterson did was not acceptable, and we want to send a clear message." "What kind of sentence are we looking at if she is convicted?" I asked. "Criminal mischief in the first degree carries up to 6 years in prison and a fine of up to $500,000. The trespass charge is much lighter, up to a year in jail. But realistically, if she is convicted, she will probably get probation, community service, and restitution." Amanda paused. "The restitution is important. The court can order her to pay back the full value of what she destroyed, which gives you additional leverage in the civil cases." "So she could owe us money from both the criminal and civil cases." "The civil settlements would be reduced by whatever she pays in criminal restitution, but yes, the point is to make her whole you and the university for what she did." August came, and with it, the heat of a Colorado summer. I had installed new hives in my backyard, this time with even more prominent signage warning that they were part of a university research project and protected by law. The new colony was thriving, but it was not the same as the one that had been killed. The university had to start over with their research, setting them back more than a year. Dr. Martinez was still angry about it every time we spoke. "We had 3 different papers in development based on that colony's data," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "One of my graduate students had to completely change her dissertation topic. The impact goes so far beyond just the money." "Are we ever going to see justice on this?" I asked. "The trial is set for September," she said, "and the HOA is finally starting to crack on the settlement. Their new attorney called James last week with an offer of $75,000. Are you going to take it? James wants to counter at 85 and see if they will meet us at 80. At this point, I just want it to be over so we can focus on the research instead of legal battles." The settlement with the HOA came through in late August. $82,000, paid out over 3 years, with a public apology from the board and an agreement to update their bylaws to explicitly protect beekeeping and other environmentally beneficial activities. The HOA also agreed to host an educational event about the importance of pollinators and to install bee-friendly plantings in the common areas. Patricia, the new HOA president, personally called me to apologize. "Zachary, I am so sorry for what Brenda put you through. The board is committed to making sure nothing like this ever happens again." "I appreciate that," I said. "I just want to be able to keep bees in peace." "You absolutely can. We are putting protections in writing." My personal lawsuit against Brenda was still ongoing, as was her criminal trial. Gordon Fletcher tried one more time to settle with Marcus, this time offering $15,000. Marcus countered at $40,000, knowing it was still a long shot. To my surprise, Brenda accepted. Her attorney called Marcus in early September to finalize the details. She would pay me $40,000 over 5 years, with payments starting immediately. In exchange, I would drop my lawsuit and agree not to pursue any further claims against her related to the bees. She is probably trying to show contrition before the criminal trial, Marcus explained. If she is seen as taking responsibility and making amends, it might help with sentencing. I do not care about her strategy, I said. I just want to be made whole. You will be. Between this settlement and the university settlement, you are getting the income you lost, and then some. And you still get to keep the new bees and continue with the research. Oh, the criminal trial started in mid-September. I testified on the first day, explaining the research project, the value of the bees, and what I had found that Tuesday morning in March. I described my conversation with Brenda at the fence and her smug satisfaction at having handled the situation. Dr. Martinez testified next, explaining the scientific value of the lost colony and the setback to the research. She had charts and graphs showing the genetic markers they had been tracking and the potential implications for colony collapse disorder research worldwide. Rick from Summit Pest Solutions testified again, confirming that Brenda had told him there were no bees on my property. The defense tried to paint Brenda as a dedicated volunteer who had made an innocent mistake while trying to protect her neighbors. They brought in character witnesses who talked about her years of service to the community and her commitment to keeping the neighborhood safe. But none of it could overcome the evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on both counts. Brenda broke down crying when the verdict was read. Gordon Fletcher put his arm around her shoulders, but there was nothing he could do. She had been convicted of a felony. Sentencing was set for October. In the meantime, Brenda had to surrender her passport and was released on her own recognizance pending the sentencing hearing. I felt a strange mix of emotions after the verdict. Relief, certainly. Vindication. But also a lingering sadness about the whole situation. This did not have to happen. If Brenda had just talked to me, if she had shown even a shred of respect for my property rights, none of this would have occurred. The sentencing hearing was on a cold October morning. The leaves had turned golden and red, and there was frost on my car windshield when I drove to the courthouse. Amanda Chen had told me that I could give a victim impact statement if I wanted to, and I had spent several days thinking about what to say. The courtroom was more crowded than it had been for the trial. Several neighbors had shown up, some supporting Brenda, others supporting me. Dr. Martinez was there, along with James Crawford. Marcus sat beside me at the front. The judge called the hearing to order and asked if the defendant wished to make a statement. Brenda stood, her hands shaking as she held a piece of paper. Your Honor, I want to say how sorry I am for what happened. I never intended to hurt anyone or destroy anything valuable. I was trying to do my job as HOA president and protect my neighbors, and I made terrible mistakes. I have lost my position on the board, my reputation in the community, the respect of my neighbors. I have to live with that every day. I am asking for mercy and for a chance to make things right. She sat down, tears streaming down her face. The judge looked at Amanda Chen. Does the prosecution wish to make a recommendation? Yes, Your Honor. The state recommends a sentence of 3 years supervised probation, 200 hours of community service with a focus on environmental conservation, and full restitution to the victims in the amount of $82,000 to the University of Colorado and $40,000 to Zachary Anderson. The judge made a note, then looked at me. Mr. Anderson, I understand you have prepared a victim impact statement. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I had written and rewritten my statement a dozen times, trying to balance my anger with the reality that Brenda was still a human being who had made catastrophic mistakes. Your Honor, what happened to my bees was not just about the money, though the financial loss was significant. It was about the violation of my property rights, the destruction of important research, and the arrogance of someone who thought they had the right to make decisions about my property without my knowledge or consent. I paused, looking at Brenda. I kept those bees carefully. I followed every protocol. I made sure they were safe and healthy and not bothering anyone. And in one day, because of one person's decision, 8 months of work and a genetically unique colony that cannot be replaced were destroyed. The university had to start over. A graduate student had to change her entire dissertation. Research that could have helped protect pollinators worldwide was set back by more than a year, all because someone thought they knew better than the experts. I took a breath. I do not want to see Ms. Patterson go to prison. I do not think that serves anyone. But I do want her to understand that what she did was serious and had real consequences. And I want other HOA board members to understand that they cannot just do whatever they want without accountability. I sat down. The judge nodded slowly. Ms. Patterson, please stand. Brenda stood, Gordon Fletcher beside her. Gordon, I have reviewed the evidence in this case, the testimony from the trial, and the statements made here today. What you did was not a simple mistake. You knowingly lied to the pest control company about the presence of bees on Mr. Anderson's property. You exceeded your authority as HOA president, and you destroyed valuable property belonging both to Mr. Anderson and to the University of Colorado. The fact that you were trying to do your job does not excuse the methods you chose. The judge paused, looking down at her papers. However, I also note that you have no prior criminal record, that you have already begun making restitution through civil settlements, and that you have shown some remorse for your actions. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 4 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service focused on environmental conservation and education about pollinators, and full restitution is recommended by the prosecution. You will also pay court costs and fees. If you violate the terms of your probation, you will serve the remainder of your sentence in custody, which could be up to 3 years in the county jail. Brenda nodded, still crying. Additionally, the judge continued, I am ordering that as part of your community service, you will assist with educational programs about responsible HOA, governance, and property rights. You will help other board members understand the limits of their authority and the importance of respecting homeowners' rights. Gordon Fletcher whispered something to Brenda, and she nodded again. This court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Martinez shook my hand. It is over, she said. Finally. How's the new colony doing? I asked. Thriving. We should have enough data to start publishing results by next spring. It will not make up for what we lost, but it is something. James Crawford joined us. The university appreciates everything you did to help with the case, Zachary. We could not have gotten this outcome without your cooperation and your detailed records. I just wanted justice, I said. You got it. And hopefully this sends a message to HOAs everywhere that they cannot just run roughshod over homeowners' rights. Amanda Chen came out of the courthouse and walked over to us. Mr. Anderson, I wanted to thank you for your patience with the criminal process. I know it has been a long road, but I think we got the right outcome. Will she actually pay the restitution? I asked. She will, or she will go to jail. The probation department monitors that closely. And you have the civil settlements as backup if she defaults on the criminal restitution. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. The new bee colony flourished, producing excellent data for the university's research. Dr. Martinez's graduate student found a new angle for her dissertation and was excited about the results. The HOA, under Patricia's leadership, became much more responsive and respectful of homeowners' rights. Brenda moved out of the neighborhood in December. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house and moved to a condo in a different part of Boulder, somewhere without an HOA. I did not see her again. The restitution payments arrived like clockwork, both from Brenda personally and from the HOA's insurance company. I used some of the money to upgrade my beekeeping equipment and donate to pollinator conservation programs. The rest went into savings. By the following spring, almost exactly a year after the bees had been killed, the new colony had produced remarkable results. Dr. Martinez called me excitedly to tell me that they had identified genetic markers that could potentially be bred into commercial bee populations to increase pesticide resistance. Zachary, this is huge, she said. We are talking about findings that could help protect honeybee populations worldwide. None of this would have been possible without your cooperation and your commitment to hosting the research, even after everything that happened. "The bees do all the work," I said. "I just provide the space." "It is more than that. You stood up for the research when it mattered most. You fought for accountability. That meant something." I walked out to my backyard that evening, listening to the gentle hum of thousands of bees going about their work. The hives were painted white and gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The monitoring equipment blinked its steady lights, recording data that would contribute to scientific understanding. This was what Brenda had tried to destroy. This peaceful, productive, valuable corner of my property where research was happening that could make a real difference in the world. All because she could not stand the idea that someone in her neighborhood was doing something she did not approve of, something she had not personally authorized. But she had failed. The research continued, the bees thrived, and justice, slow and imperfect as it was, had been served. I thought about writing to Brenda, maybe saying something about forgiveness or moving forward, but in the end, I decided against it. Some bridges, once burned, do not need to be rebuilt. She had her consequences to live with, and I had my bees. The University of Colorado published its first paper based on the new colony's data in the summer of 2027. Dr. Martinez was the lead author, and my name appeared in the acknowledgments. The authors wished to thank Zachary Anderson for his dedication to this research and his resilience in the face of significant challenges. It was not the recognition I had been seeking when I first agreed to host the research colony, but it felt right. A small acknowledgement of everything that had happened, everything that had been lost and fought for, and ultimately preserved. The neighborhood changed too. The HOA installed native flowering plants throughout the common areas, creating pollinator corridors that benefited not just my research bees, but the wild bees and other pollinators in the area. They hosted an annual Pollinator Awareness Day every spring, with educational booths and activities for kids. Patricia told me it had become one of the neighborhood's most popular events. "People love learning about the bees," she said, "and it has really changed how everyone thinks about HOAs. We are not here to control every little thing people do. We are here to help the community thrive." I never completely forgot what had happened. Sometimes when I was out checking on the hives, I would remember that Tuesday morning in March when I found thousands of dead bees carpeting the ground. I would remember the anger and the helplessness and the months of legal battles that followed. But mostly, I just listened to the bees humming their ancient song, doing the work they had been doing for millions of years, unaware of the human dramas that swirled around them. They pollinated flowers and made honey, and raised new generations, and in doing so, they contributed to the research that might someday help save their species. That was worth fighting for. That was worth all of it. And on warm summer evenings, when I sat on my back porch with a cold drink and watched the bees make their final trips of the day back to the hives, I felt something close to peace. Justice had been slow and imperfect and expensive, but it had come. Brenda Patterson had tried to kill my bee colony without knowing it was part of a university study, and she had paid for it. She paid in money and reputation and criminal conviction and community service. She paid in the loss of her home and her standing in a neighborhood she had tried to control, and I got to keep my bees. In the end, that felt like enough.